Another thing that I want to do here is change the sky background for this environment, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So in order to change the sky color, what we're going to do is go over to Edit, Render Settings, and this will give us properties for some of the render settings. Now, this item right here, the Skybox material, allows us to pick some sort of sky dome texture image to put over top of the background. We've got a fairly large selection since we included that entire package for them. But in this case, I'm going to pick the eerie one. You can pick whatever else you very well please, so long as it's one of the Skybox textures. For example, this one or this one would not work with it, since that is the texture for the player model. So select that, double click on it, it'll show up here. Now when you run the game, you should see a more interesting background behind your ground. Alright, you'd probably be able to see a little bit more of the interesting stuff should your view be back a little bit further, which you could change if you looked through the properties on the player. Back here in the third-person camera component of the player, the distance of the camera from the player and the height from the camera to the player's head. You could play around with these values to change how much of the scene that you view in addition to the character. Okay. So now that we've got a little bit of ground and a background in our scene, it's beginning to look a little bit more interesting. However, flat ground is kind of flat ground and boring. So what we're going to do is add in some boxes just to spice things up a little bit. So if you go to the Game Object drop-down, go to Create Other and Cube. Alright, that's going to put a little cube object there beneath the terrain. So you drag that up a little bit. And you could really put it just about anywhere. This is entirely up to you at this point. I'm going to scale mine up just so that it's a little bit more of a formidable obstacle here. Okay. Alright, so again, I'm just using the widget options here to change the size of it. So once I've got a reasonable size box, how I want it, obviously that's one of them. It might be a little bit tedious to keep doing that over and over again to put more boxes in. So what I can do here is I can press Control D, and that will duplicate my box, and so I can move it around and put it somewhere else. So that allows me to quickly create similar things in my environment and fill it with geometry. Okay, so that should make things a little bit more interesting when we're walking around in it, so we now have obstacles that we can walk into prevent us from moving around. Theoretically, we might even be able to jump on one of these if it was low enough. I don't think my character's... yeah, you can't jump on that this way. But if you put in an additional one, just sunk it down a little bit, like what if I took this one over here? Move this a little bit closer, sink it down some. So we should be able to hop on one box to the next one. So as you can see, so you can play around with that to get a very interesting environment already, and we're only playing with basic geometry. So what I want to do next is add in a little bit of interactivity to our game. And so we're going to need a little bit of scripting. This is going to be real basic stuff. It shouldn't be very lengthy either. So I'm going to create a folder here specifically for my stuff, so my assets, and another folder within here specifically for scripts. Now you want to keep your stuff organized, because once you're creating something more complicated, this stuff fills up really fast. So pay attention to the little things. The first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a script for doing points on the player. And I'm going to right click here, create Javascript. Alright, so Unity does a huge variety of different scripting languages. You can really do it in C#, you can do it in JavaScript. It has a couple of other options, but it's very flexible as far as what you're going to use. The documentation is primarily for JavaScript, so that's going to be the path of least resistance for you. And JavaScript is a pretty simple language to work with, so it's not too big of a deal. So this one, I'm going to call this player script. All it's going to do is keep track of the points and display the points on the screen. I'm going to double click on this, and this will bring up the built-in script editor. Okay, I've got a little bit of text over here that I'm just going to paste into here. Alright, so this is just a quick piece of code. All it does, this is a variable that tracks our points. This is an event that fires when the game is drawing the graphical user interface, and this is just code to put the number of points on the screen at this particular location. So I'm going to save this, minimize this window, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this player script and I'm going to drag it and drop it onto the player object up in the hierarchy window. Alright, once I let go, it'll ask me if I want to lose the prefab connection, and this is probably a good idea. You can look into this a little bit more later. Prefabs are an important idea. Okay, and you can see here on the player object, when we scroll down to the bottom, we should have the player script there. Okay. So that script should keep track of everything that we need as far as points go. The next thing that we need to do is we need to add in an object and have it so that when we collide with this object, it adds points to the player. So I'm going to start with the script, and then I'm going to add an object that takes advantage of it. And it's a little bit of a special object, so you'll see in a moment. So back here to the scripts folder, I'm going to right click on it, again, create JavaScript. This one I am going to call the point script. Alright, I'm going to open this up. Again, I have some code over here. Alright, and all that this script is going to do, it's going to wait for collisions to occur, or actually when a collision triggers this particular event. You'll see how it gets triggered in a moment. We check to see with the object that we just collided with. If the object we just collided with is the player, so we're checking that tag, if you recall, on the player that we set, or made sure that was set. And we're going to then set the points to increment by 1. Then we're going to destroy this particular object so that the points vanish after you pick them up. Okay. So what I want you to do now that we have both of those scripts, we need to add in that object for adding points. So if you go to game object, create other, sphere. Alright, you're going to get a sphere off in the middle of nowhere. We'll put it back somewhere where we can see it. Okay. And over here we've got some of the properties. Under the sphere collider, there is this isTrigger. So if you remember a little bit from that code, it had the onTrigger enter, right here. Okay, so we want to make sure that this trigger button is checked so that it will actually send trigger messages to this script. So check this, okay, and we're going to take the point script, drag it back onto the sphere, okay, so it'll show up down here. So now, when the player walks into it, it'll trigger that event in the script, which will then increment the player's score and display it on screen. Okay. Now again, if you want to put in a couple of these different items here, alright, so just Control D, duplicate this. I'm going to put this up on the little pedestal over here. Just that it's a little bit of a challenge to get to. Alright, so now when we run the game, we should be able to see. Alright, so you can see up here in the top left corner, the points is displayed as 0, Now if we take here and walk into this ball, you can see that vanished and our points is now 1. So we've basically got a really simple game set up here. You know, just kind of like an adventure platformer point gathering game. And that was really easy to set up. This was drag and drop stuff for the most part, and those scripts were really simple. So you can imagine, once you really get into this and work with a little bit of the scripting language, then you can really create complicated stuff really fast and with great ease. And the nice thing about all these properties here is that all these little checkboxes, all these little sliders are really easy for people to work with. So if you've got a coder, you know, you can make the scripts and then everybody else can just drag these little sliders around. So it's a really good collaborative tool as well. Okay, so this is a really simple game. I hope you've learned a fair bit from it. Thanks for watching.